The stories. Why locals avoided that highway turnout after archived tapes is, for years, people driving the old state highway between two small towns avoided a certain turnout near mile marker 91. The place looked harmless enough, a cracked patch of asphalt with a slanted guardrail, some weeds, and a broken streetlight. But those who grew up nearby said that if you stopped there at night, strange things happened. Back in 1996, a highway maintenance worker named Travis Keene was assigned to inspect storm drains along that stretch. He was 38, lived alone, and usually did his rounds before sunrise to avoid heavy traffic. That February morning, he radioed his supervisor around 4:20 a.m., saying he had stopped at the turnout near the ridge because a culvert there was flooded. It was the last transmission anyone heard from him. When the crew came later that day, they found his truck idling, driver's door open, and his flashlight lying in the ditch. His radio was still on the seat, buzzing with static. At first, they thought maybe he slipped and fell into the drainage pit, but search teams combed the area for 3 days with dogs and found nothing. The official report listed him as missing. In early spring that year, a state trooper found a small cassette recorder wedged under the passenger seat of Keene's truck. The tape was partially damaged by moisture, but audio engineers later salvaged parts of it. What they heard caused the highway department to quietly close that turnout for several months. Only fragments of the tape were ever released, though copies circulated among troopers and local reporters. On the tape, Keene's voice could be heard describing the flooded culvert and making notes for his report. He mentioned hearing a sound like running water even though the drainage was still. Then there was a pause, followed by the crunch of gravel and a faint metallic knocking, as if something were striking the guardrail. He muttered that someone must be out there. Moments later, his tone changed. He whispered that a figure was standing at the end of the turnout, near his truck lights, motionless. The rest of the tape dissolved into static, then a few seconds of muffled breathing, then silence. Investigators checked the surrounding land for any sign of trespassers. The nearest houses were half a mile away, and nobody reported hearing or seeing anything unusual that night. Still, the Highway Patrol logged several late-night calls over the next month from drivers who said they saw flashing lights or a person standing in the road waving them down near that same marker. When officers arrived, nothing was ever there. In 2002, a retired dispatcher named Loretta Vance told a local paper she had archived several of the old emergency tapes from that period. She said she remembered one specific call that never made it into the public file. According to her, a truck driver had radioed in saying there was a man in a reflective vest near the turnout signaling for help. By the time a patrol unit arrived 8 minutes later, the truck driver was gone. His rig was found 3 miles down the road, engine off, lights on, and the door locked from the inside. He was later located at a diner 20 miles away, confused and unable to recall leaving the cab. Reporters tried to verify her memory through the department's records office, but several of the call logs from 1996 through 1998 were missing, apparently lost during a server migration. Still, copies of the Keene tape surfaced online around 2011 after someone uploaded a restored version from an old police archive. Audio specialists claimed the frequency hiss on the track shifted in a way that suggested outdoor interference, like shortwave bleed or power line distortion, though no transmission lines ran near that turnout. A freelance investigator named Aaron Byers, who once worked for the State Transport Division, conducted his own study of the site in 2017. He took soil and water samples and found nothing unusual except traces of magnetized iron particles near the guardrail. He speculated that the metallic knocking Keene mentioned could have been the sound of loose signage vibrating from wind gusts. However, his field recorder picked up a faint, rhythmic pulse whenever his car engine was idling near the slope, a pattern that matched the timing of the static bursts on Keene's tape. Locals told Byers that animals often avoided that patch of asphalt. Drivers noticed deer crossing farther down the road and stray dogs turning away before the curve. One witness, a postal carrier named Darlene Ruiz, said she once stopped there to fix a loose mirror and saw what looked like a headlight beam flicker across the inside of her car, even though no vehicle was approaching. She left immediately and later noticed her clock had jumped ahead 12 minutes. Her phone's timestamp showed the same gap. The county eventually restructured the route in 2020, adding new lanes that bypassed the turnout completely. The old guardrail was removed, though pieces of it remained piled in a maintenance yard behind the highway office. Some claim that late at night, if you drive along the parallel service road, you can still see faint taillights hovering where the old pavement used to curve. Over time, the Keene disappearance became part of regional folklore, filed next to old mine accidents and bridge collapse rumors, yet certain details kept resurfacing, like the archived dispatcher notes that matched later reports, or the fact that multiple tapes contained the same background hum. A few amateur sleuths suggested it was a recording artifact caused by cheap equipment, but no one could explain why the distortion always rose in pitch before the moment of silence. In 2023, a hobbyist group using drone-mounted sensors mapped the ridge for a documentary. They detected an underground cavity, roughly 12 feet beneath the turnout site, extending toward the nearby creek. Geological experts said it was probably an erosion tunnel formed by runoff, though it wasn't present in surveys from the 1980s. The cavity collapsed a few months later after heavy rain, leaving a sinkhole that swallowed part of the service fence. No trace of Travis Keene or his equipment was ever found in that area, but a later inventory from the transport department listed one missing flood gauge and a handheld magnetometer, both last signed out under his name. Today, older residents still tell travelers not to pull over between marker 90 and marker 92. They say sometimes, when the air is heavy with moisture and the road hums beneath your tires, you can hear faint tapping, like metal brushing metal, and a low voice reporting water levels into an old cassette recorder. Whether that's just echo carried from the nearby drainage tunnels or something else entirely remains uncertain. What's clear is that no one in town stops at that turnout anymore. The stories might be exaggerated, but every legend begins somewhere, and this one began with a man who simply vanished while doing his job. One quiet morning in 1996, the burning house on Ridge Road, Tennessee. Smoke showed over the folded hills west of Johnson City after sundown, a thin gray ribbon flattening under a cooling sky. Drivers slowed along Ridge Road and watched a single roofline lose its shape behind moving haze. Dispatch logs captured the first report at 1920, citing flames visible through trees near a narrow bend. The caller reportedly could not confirm people inside, only that the windows looked black and the yard was empty. Ethan Ward was 41, a volunteer firefighter from Jonesboro, driving home after a hardware errand when he saw the smoke. He slowed near the ridge crest and turned onto the gravel turnout by habit learned during brush seasons. His purpose that evening was practical and local, to check if anyone needed water or a ride toward the highway. Archive notes state he kept a wool blanket and a pry bar in his truck, a routine drawn from winter wrecks. He radioed county dispatch using a handheld set he carried off duty, requesting confirmation of the address that no one actually named. Mara Collins was 33, a home health nurse finishing a medication check near Telford, returning toward the city with an empty cooler. Her route crossed Ridge Road because traffic on the highway moved strangely that week after resurfacing work. She saw the same gray band, then a brighter pulse from a deeper pocket of trees cut into the slope. State records list her as licensed since 2011 with no disciplinary marks and multiple rural assignments. She later told deputies she stopped because the color shifted from brush to structure, a difference she recognized from farm incidents. Deputy Luis Benton was 37, a patrol deputy with Washington County, answering a fire assist call relayed across channels after neighboring units were engaged. His stated purpose was scene safety and initial perimeter control while county engines rerouted from a barn alarm. According to dispatch logs, he cleared a traffic complaint near Boone's Creek and set lights before the last ridge curve. His cruiser camera reportedly caught brief reflections on roadside mailboxes, then nothing but drifting particulate like fine dust. Some locals claimed the camera angle missed the driveway entirely, though investigators never confirmed a technical fault. The structure sat back from the road behind mature pines, a single-story rectangle with a shallow porch and a tin roof. County appraisal data listed it as built in the late 1970s with a detached shed and a shallow well. Records conflict on whether the electric service was active because one entry shows a delinquent account while another shows a recent payment. Ethan parked facing out and grabbed his pry bar, calling toward the porch that carried 2 chairs and a plastic crate. He reported hearing a low crack inside, not like a collapse, more like resinous boards reacting to heat across tight nails. Mara set her cooler on the driveway gravel and tried the front knob, which felt warm but not dangerous, then swung inward. She called out for anyone home and moved past the door line, stopping at a short hall choked with thin smoke. Ethan followed her with the blanket and a small flashlight, and they worked right first toward a room with stacked bins. County file from 2009 described prior code concerns about storage and blocked egress at this parcel, though no fines were listed. Investigators never confirmed whether those recommendations were addressed because 2 separate inspections show conflicting completion notes. Inside the bins were magazines and folded tarps, plus canning jars labeled with masking tape and dates that read last winter. The floor showed fresh sweeping lines, a detail noted in archived notes because the house otherwise felt unused. Ethan checked the window latch and found it painted shut, then cracked the frame with the pry bar to vent smoke. Mara pointed left toward a glow against a closed door. Not bright, just persistent, like heat collecting behind a thin barrier. They backed out to avoid pulling air through the hallway and feeding what had not yet broken free. Deputy Benton reached the turnout and cut his siren, then walked in with a flashlight and a disposable mask kept in his vest. He asked about occupants, utilities, and any hazards like cylinders or stored fuel, and Ethan gave short answers while scanning the tree line. State records showed a recent transfer of the property to a holding company with a Johnson City mailbox and no listed tenant. Some locals claimed a handyman stayed there between small jobs, sleeping on a cot and keeping tools in the shed. Investigators never confirmed his name, and records conflict on whether a temporary occupancy permit existed that season. Engines from Gray and Jonesboro turned onto Ridge Road within minutes, rerouted by radio after the barn alarm cleared false. The pump operator laid supply down the drive, while another crew stretched a line to the porch and checked the sill for flame. Ethan briefed the arriving lieutenant and stepped aside, then offered to pull a secondary line toward the shed if commanded. Dispatch logs show a note at 1931 about low water at the nearest hydrant, prompting a tender request from a neighboring district. The lieutenant reportedly decided on a quick interior search while the line charged, prioritizing rooms closest to the visible glow. Mara waited near the turnout and watched the tree line move against diffuse light, noticing a vehicle half hidden beyond the shed. She told Deputy Benton, and they walked over, finding an older sedan settled into grass with mildew on the windows and a flat tire. The plates returned to a woman from Unicoi, suspended for insurance issues, according to a quick check that night. Records conflict on whether the vehicle was recently driven because the engine bay felt cool, but the cabin held faint cigarette odor. Some locals claimed a similar car parked there on prior evenings, seen from the ridge during dog walks before dark. Inside the house, the quick search found no one in the main rooms, only a closed utility closet with a locked handle. The lieutenant ordered the door, forced, and a cloud of hot vapor cleared into the hallway, carrying a stronger smell like adhesive. Investigators later wrote that a portable heater sat on a shelf near stacked cardboard close to a wall outlet with a cracked face. State records show a recall notice for similar units early that year, though purchase data for this property never surfaced. The pattern of heat reportedly suggested slow smolder transitioning toward open flame, not an immediate flash. The shed added a second puzzle because someone stored 2 blue drums, both labeled as waste oil with dates from spring. Deputy Benton photographed faint boot marks on the dusty floor, angled toward a pegboard with empty hooks and a missing hammer. Archived notes mention a recent report of tool thefts along rural roads, although the described method involved pried barn doors, not sheds. Mara stood back and pointed out a shallow trench leading from the shed corner toward a low spot near the pines. Investigators never confirmed whether it carried runoff from the drums, though soil samples reportedly showed hydrocarbons below threshold levels. Engines established flow, and crews cooled the hallway while ventilation fans pushed smoke through the cut window frames. The roof held, then flexed as trapped heat moved, releasing a rush that sounded like wind where no wind existed. Ethan helped pull debris into the yard and stacked it away from the porch, watching for char that could reignite in dry grass. The lieutenant asked for a final pass with the thermal camera, which showed a stubborn hot line behind the closet adjacent to old shelving. Records conflict on whether wiring upgrades ever reached this wall because the permit file stops at rough inspection. As operations slowed, a neighbor walked up from the lower bend, a retired teacher who kept notes on local history for weekend talks. He told Deputy Benton the house once belonged to a family that left during the housing slump, then rented to short-term occupants. He said a man with a gray cap visited that week carrying a tool bag and a stack of envelopes clipped together. Some locals claimed the envelopes were rent notices, while others said they looked like county flyers about brush cleanup. Investigators never confirmed either, and no envelopes were found in the debris or the nearby ditch. A second neighbor recalled hearing a truck on Ridge Road before dusk, stopping briefly near the turnout where Ethan later parked. Dispatch logs include a time-stamped note about a call from another ridge, mentioning a revving sound and a quick departure downhill. State records contain no traffic stop matching that description because cruisers were occupied with the barn alarm and a separate welfare check. Archived notes suggest similar patterns at vacant structures during cold snaps, when heaters appear without paperwork and vanish after damage. The pattern reportedly motivated patrol sweeps that winter, although budget sheets show reduced overtime during that quarter. When investigators sifted the hallway, they found 2 door keys fused together near the closet, an odd pairing for such a narrow space. Ethan told them he had not seen a ring by the entry table, only scattered coins and a cracked picture frame. Mara remembered a faint outline on the wall where something once hung. Possibly a calendar, possibly a routing sheet for maintenance visits. Records conflict on whether a property manager ever posted documents inside rentals because policies changed when ownership moved to holding companies. Investigators never confirmed the origin of the fused keys, though measurements matched standard blanks used across the county. The final report described the cause as undetermined, with contributing factors tied to portable heat and compromised outlets along the interior wall. It noted the absence of occupants and the lack of personal clothing in closets, plus stacked bins suggesting storage rather than residence. State records later updated the parcel as unsafe, recommending fencing and watch patrols during evenings when traffic thins across the ridge. Some locals claimed they saw a single light in the shed days after the fire, a small square glow that disappeared when trucks approached. Investigators never confirmed that detail, and camera coverage shows only drifting night insects reflecting a weak beam. Months later, the sedan was towed, the shed locks replaced, and the house boarded with standard plywood stencil marks facing the road. Archived notes remark that Ethan returned twice on his own time to check for trespass, finding only raccoon prints and windblown ash. Mara crossed the ridge less often after shifting routes, but she kept a map pin on her phone to remember the turnoff. Records conflict on whether the holding company renewed insurance because one policy number shows a cancellation while another appears active with missing dates. The parcel remains listed as improved rural, awaiting decisions that reportedly stalled during meetings held without posted minutes. What happened inside the hour before smoke rose over the hills remains a narrowing field of possibilities tested against stubborn gaps. The heater could have crept against cardboard, or an unseen splice could have heated behind shelving where old nails pierced brittle insulation. A visitor might have plugged something into the cracked outlet, then left, believing the glow would settle as temperatures dropped. Investigators never confirmed a timeline inside that closet, and the county file from 2009 ends before the relevant changes. Some locals claimed the house never wanted people, yet the official record only shows heat, fuel, oxygen, and a door that stuck. The stories. This abandoned cabin is a warning trap in winter. The old cabin beside the county line looks empty from the road during storms. Yet a warm porch light appears. Drivers aim for it when whiteout wipes the world because a light means shelter, or at least a neighbor. Rhea Calder is 36 and works as a county snow operations supervisor, and she keeps a spiral notebook of storm anomalies. She shows up before dawn, checks blades and salt loads, and marks complaint calls with a thin blue pen. Her goal this morning is simple: get the ridge plowed before the school runs, then swing by a trouble spot. The spot is a bend near an abandoned mining cabin, where people keep calling for help when the sky goes white. The incident that changes her plan starts with two archived calls that ping the same mile marker and both mention the same porch light. The first caller said the light flicked on like someone waved them in, and then their SUV sank past the axle in drifted powder. The second caller said he saw reflective stakes like a private driveway, and he trusted the stakes and followed them in. Rhea drives out with a plow and a county ranger, and the wind pulls spindrift across the hood like milk. She idles beside the bend, then walks the last stretch on a packed lane that should not exist. The lane is narrow, precisely the width of a small plow, and the snow on its edges shows a scalloped bite that her crews do not leave. She studies the porch light, which is wired to a salvaged marine battery and a hockey puck-sized solar panel. The cabin window is boarded, yet bare footprints cross the porch, and the snow on the mat is tamped smooth with a boot heel. A battery radio inside clicks on and off on weather band, then goes silent like a timer has died. A tow truck appears before Rhea can call the last caller back, and the driver waves from a bright red cab. He introduces himself as Tully Grange, and he says he just happened to be nearby, which is unlikely on a weekday morning before the bus runs. He backs toward the trapped SUV with a practiced arc, then stops when Rhea holds up a hand. "This is county equipment," she says. And he shrugs, then says he can wait in the pullout. She notes the pullout was not there last week, because she passed here in a smaller storm and saw only brush and drift. The fresh gravel under his tires is a tan quartz blend not used by their supplier, which her crews call peach pit gravel because it stains gloves. Complication lands in small details that refuse to match, and details are the only honest witnesses in bad weather. The reflective stakes near the porch are county colors, yet the plastic sleeves are slightly glossy, which means hardware store knockoffs. The stake spacing mirrors a county driveway template, yet the end flare is reversed, which a training manual would not allow. She opens her spiral and writes the count of stakes and the order of colors, then photographs each with her phone. The ranger sets a trail camera on a fence post, angled at the bend, and another on the porch beam, both tagged with the hour and coordinates. Rhea pulls a corner of the mat and finds two zip ties and a clipped wire, both wet from this morning, not last week. Investigation moves step by step when the storm pauses and the phones ring less, so she visits a gas station near the turnoff. The clerk says a red tow truck fills up on calm days and buys coffee for anyone who mentions the cabin. A retired school bus driver named Lauren Ibarra stops for a paper, and he says he saw private plow tracks peel off before the storm, then vanish in wind. She requests dispatch logs for the past 3 winters and filters for that mile marker, then highlights clusters that pair with heavy snow. Callers mention the same porch light, the same reflective stakes, and the same quick tow arrival, which dispatch marks as helpful. She watches a dash cam clip from last month where the light clicks on as the hood swings left, then the video ends with a soft crunch. Archived calls from 2021 mention a ham radio voice that says shelter is nearby, and then silence like a squelch cut. A volunteer firefighter says in a witness statement that the cabin used to be a safety cache and now nobody claims ownership. A Forest Service mail thread she prints at the office says the cabin fell off the map after a boundary change in 2019. Rhea returns with 2 crew trucks and a trooper who knows every rancher along that ridge, and they wait for nightfall. A thin moon slides behind blown cloud, and the porch light pops alive at the first gust, soft and steady like a welcome sign. A compact pickup rolls up from the far side with its lights off, then a figure hops out and crouches at the porch corner. The ranger whispers that the figure holds a small remote, and the light changes from dim to bright after a thumb tap. Rhea steps forward and says, "Good evening," and the figure bolts toward the pickup, then slips where the packed lane meets churned gravel. The trooper covers the exit with his lights, and the pickup idles in a pool of steam, and the figure surrenders with hands up. They identify him as a subcontractor to Grange Recovery, and his jacket pockets hold a keychain remote and 2 spare batteries. Zip ties match the ones under the mat, and a roll of reflective tape matches the stakes, which are cut to driveway template lengths. He says he was only maintaining a safety light and keeping the lane open, which is not a service the county requested. Rhea stays methodical because motive hides under habit, not speeches that arrive too fast. She asks where the gravel came from, and he says a supplier in the valley, yet the receipts in his glove box show a hardware warehouse 2 counties south. She asks why the radio trips a loop on weatherband after the door opens, and he says it helps people feel calm. She compiles a timeline that starts with a bridge closure 3 winters ago, which pushed navigation apps toward this county road. Drivers used the cabin light as a wayfinder during whiteouts, while their maps insisted the bend belonged to a safe connector. The subcontractor and a partner groomed a false lane with a small plow, then dragged a lure line past the porch to a drift. Vehicles followed the stakes and the shine, then sank where the wind always filled the cut, and then a tow contract appeared fast. The subcontractor had a scanner tuned for dispatch, and he shadowed snow squalls, then nudged the light when a hood turned. The porch light served as both promise and bait, a warning tone that pretended to help while herding people toward trouble. The twist clicks when Rhea notices something everyone else ignored, because details are stubborn and patient when money moves. The stakes used county colors, yet the white stripe appears cream at dusk, which happens when old tape yellows in cold. The county only switched to that tape after a backorder last spring, yet the stakes showed last winter, which means someone copied and refreshed. She pulls a photo from the first cluster of calls and zooms on a stake that leans at a slant near a spruce. A boot print sits at the base with a split heel pattern, and the subcontractor wears the same make, which the trooper confirms. The peach pit gravel under the pullout matches bags stacked in the pickup bed, stamped with a store brand not used locally. They bring in Tully Grange on a quiet afternoon, and he arrives calm, carrying a thermos with a sticker from a drag racing track. He says he never told anyone to follow that light, and he is right in the narrow way salesmen are right. He made sure the light stayed visible from the highway, and he made sure the false lane looked exactly like a private driveway. Rhea uses her spiral notes and dispatch timestamps and the dashcam clip to assemble a proof that a prosecutor can lift. The proof is plain. The lane grooming aligns with tow arrivals, and the light remote explains the synchronized porch glow. The radio loop satisfies a claim of safety service, yet the loop trips only when a door opens after a driver commits. Witnesses give short statements. A school custodian says he saw stakes in a truck behind the parts store, and a rancher remembers a trailer loaded with gravel. A hardware buyer confirms past orders of reflective sleeves and tape in county patterns, then prints invoices with dates that match storm weeks. The trail camera video shows the subcontractor stepping off distances with a tape measure, then pressing reflectors into drifted banks. The county files charges on false markings and a long list of fraud-related counts, and the state adds a charge tied to interference. Rhea builds a corrective plan with simple steps: remove the stakes, angle the porch light away from the bend, and post clear closure boards. She requests new advance signs that warn of no outlet during storms, and the road team builds a berm past the bend. In spring, she visits the cabin in daylight when the stream runs high and the spruce throws a clean shadow. The boards are still up, and the marine battery sits in a crate with a tag that says evidence in blocky marker. She writes a last page in the spiral: cabin neutralized, tow arrivals normal, and local drivers back to watching the sky instead of a lure. She keeps the dashcam clip on her work desktop as a reminder of how easily stressed people choose the first light they see. She writes a line on a training slide: never chase glow in a whiteout, choose distance markers and windbreaks and patience. She speaks at a town meeting using plain words, then thanks the bus drivers and the ranch hands who notice small things that save bigger things. According to a statement filed later, the subcontractor said he borrowed the idea from a forum where recovery outfits shared winter tips. The forum is archived now, and the thread title mentions hazard magnets, which makes her jaw tighten in a quiet office. She forwards the archive to a state liaison, then shuts her laptop and listens to the heater tick inside the shop. 2 winters later, a driver who once followed the light sends the department a short letter with a photo of the bend in Sunday. The letter says, "Thank you for fixing the trap, and thank you for posting signs that speak like a human, not a brochure." Ria pins the photo on the bulletin board and draws a small check beside the mile marker on a laminated map. The cabin still stands, where the wind stacks powder against the wall, and a jay hops along the porch rail after a thaw. People talk about that porch like a lucky star in a bad stretch. Yet the real luck was a person with a notebook. A false beacon is a cruel thing in winter, and the fix was not a heroic beatdown, only careful eyes and a stop. She drives past when each first snow begins, then checks the berm and the markers and the culvert past the spruce. The road hums under studded tires, and the bend looks like any other bend in a county full of the same bends. She knows a trap can wear a smile and a soft bulb, and a warning means nothing unless it points away from harm. The old cabin still looks empty if you do not look close, and light can lie when money needs help. Ria prefers the dull honesty of a reflector that never blinks, and a berm that refuses to pretend it is a road. She closes her spiral at the end of each shift and treats winter like a puzzle that pays back the patient mind. The stories. This highway turnout kept a missing trucker's toll receipt. The turnout sits between scrub pines and a windblown ditch, and it held a toll receipt longer than anyone realized. The receipt came from a night when a driver stopped for 6 quiet minutes, then disappeared beyond the concrete barriers. Dorian Hale worked highway maintenance for the county, age 37, and he took pride in simple, measurable things. His Thursday assignment was routine line checks, with a side errand to clear debris from an overflow grate near the eastbound turnout. The morning felt ordinary as he idled the orange pickup, sipped gas station coffee, and clipped a laminated checklist to his clipboard. He pulled on gloves, set cones, then walked the shoulder counting reflective posts, and he hummed a tune he could not place. At the turnout, he knelt by the grated culvert, where stray plastic and crushed cans made a soggy stripe against rusted mesh. A folded paper showed only a blue stripe and a timestamp smudged by rain. The paper was stiff, thin, and heat-printed, the kind used at toll plazas that still handed cash change. He eased it open with a screwdriver tip, read a plaza name he recognized, and traced a time almost exactly 2 years back. The fare matched a commercial axle count, and a faint pen mark read Brandt in shaky block letters. Dorian knew the surname because his father still kept a clipped article about a driver named Silas Brandt. The story said a veteran hauler left a warehouse near midnight, then failed to deliver a load of drywall and never returned calls. Investigators canvassed truck stops, pulled camera footage, and searched an exit ramp pond where a guardrail once stood bent. The county replaced that rail within a week, and Dorian helped pour the new anchors under a bitter early spring sky. He remembered the way troopers scanned the water with side-scan gear, and he remembered a family photo taped to a utility pole. The picture showed a smiling man with deep crow feet lines, wearing a ball cap shaped by years of Sunday. He set the receipt on the warm truck hood, and he felt a nervous pull he did not want to ignore. He radioed dispatch for a non-emergency inquiry, explained he found what looked like a toll slip, and requested guidance from the patrol office. The operator took his badge number, logged the time, and said an investigator would call once she could review the old case file. The call came after lunch from an investigator named Fenna Ortiz, who spoke carefully but asked direct questions. She confirmed the surname matched the missing driver, and she asked Dorian to secure the paper in a clean envelope. She told him to keep working as usual because she needed to check archived calls and bridge camera timestamps before driving out. He locked the receipt in a plastic map pouch, finished the great work, then walked the turnout with a slower, sharper eye. The asphalt showed faint striations where heavy rigs often idled, and a single bolt head gleamed bright against dull gravel. A cracked mirror shard lay half buried near the weeds, reflecting a tuft of cloud that moved like something alive. He logged the shard as debris, snapped a photo with a timestamp, and saved it among his maintenance images from earlier weeks. The images, he realized, showed the same corner of concrete week after week, and the corner looked slightly cleaner today. That thought returned him to the culvert, where the receipt had been wedged behind a lip most drivers never noticed. The patrol cruiser pulled up near two, and investigator Ortiz stepped out carrying a clipboard and a small camera. She was mid-40s, concise, and she asked for the sequence from his arrival to the moment he opened the folded paper. He described the gloves, the screwdriver tip, the awkward angle at the grate, and the exact place where the paper caught. She photographed the culvert, the hood of his truck, and his gloves, then placed the receipt in a fresh evidence sleeve. She asked whether he had heard of any scavengers or roadside sellers who might pick through turnouts in quiet hours. He shook his head and mentioned night fishermen at the quarry road and a retired lineman who walked his dog near dawn. Ortiz had already checked dispatch logs from the night Silas vanished, and those logs showed two calls near that turnout. One came from a motorist reporting a stalled box truck on the shoulder, which cleared itself before a trooper arrived. The second came from a bridge camera technician, noting a brief outage around 2:12, which was dismissed as routine. She asked permission to pull Dorian's maintenance photos, the ones covering every week around the 2-year mark. He agreed without hesitation and forwarded the entire folder, even the blurry shots he usually deleted at the office. Ortiz scrolled methodically, then paused on an image taken exactly 3 days after the reported outage at the bridge camera. The photo showed the same culvert, same weed line, and a crumpled label half hidden under wet pine needles. Ortiz zoomed until the pixels blurred, then noted a fragment that looked like the corner of a toll slip. She compared that week to the next, where the culvert looked cleaner, then to the next, where more wind-blown trash filled the grid again. Dorian pointed toward the bright bolt he noticed earlier, which did not appear in his older photos at all. Ortiz crouched and confirmed the bolt was new stainless, fixed through a small angle bracket that sat flush to the curb. She said the bracket was not standard for that guardrail style, and it looked like something installed to anchor a temporary brace. They walked the rail from cone to cone, and she stopped at a spot where the soil sloped into a greasy black ribbon. The smell suggested old brake dust and gear oil, and the vegetation showed a flattened path that looked more deliberate than random. She made a note to have a canine unit sweep the embankment later, and she radioed for a drone with a thermal camera. Across the turnout, a small convenience store faced the service road, and a metal bell chimed when the door opened. The clerk on duty was a woman named Karen Duplessis, age 29, who brewed coffee and stocked shelves during quiet afternoons. She said plenty of trucks idled at that turnout, but she remembered a white day cab sitting without a trailer once. Karen produced a spiral notebook where she kept odd notes to settle change disputes and lottery recollections. On a page dated 2 years back, she wrote, "Night truck, no trailer, short man, hat, hands shaking, paid in cash for cigarettes." She told them the man left a toll receipt on the counter by accident, then grabbed it quickly and stuffed it into his jacket. Ortiz photographed the notebook and asked about timing, and Karen said she wrote the note after midnight while the bell still echoed. She admitted she might be off by 20 minutes, but she remembered the man said something that felt like a warning. He said the word toll like it mattered. Then he asked if anyone was working late at the bridge control shed. The bridge control shed sat above the river, spanned 3 miles east, where cameras watched traffic and signboards scrolled travel times. Ortiz called a former technician named Orville Pacheco, age 62, who kept his own notes in a faded green ledger. He said he logged an unexpected visit that same night. When a man in a reflective vest asked for camera reset access, Orville said the visitor showed a badge sleeve without a badge, which made him cautious, and he refused to grant access. He called the after-hours line to report a vendor mismatch, and the line recorded his message with the time he spoke. The line, according to archived records, Ortiz had already pulled, captured footsteps, a door-open sound, and muffled traffic noise. They returned to the turnout while the drone lifted into a steady grid pattern, and Ortiz asked Dorian for his honest read. He believed the receipt had stayed near that lip for months, then shifted forward during a recent heavy storm last spring. The spidering of dirt on the paper edges matched the way silt moves when culverts push water hard toward daylight. The drone operator flagged a heat anomaly under the slope where the grease ribbon angled into brush and sage. A buried object held temperature longer than the surrounding dirt, and its shape suggested a long chassis with a missing rear section. Dorian stared at the screen while Ortiz arranged a small excavation crew and a wrecker with a winch and safety chains. The bucket peeled turf like old cloth, revealing crumpled metal painted white and a scraped cereal plate near a crushed step. The cab had separated from a frame that showed clean-cut ends, not torn ends, and Dorian felt his stomach tighten hard. The clean ends suggested someone removed the trailer hardware with purpose, then eased the cab down the slope intentionally. Ortiz called the medical examiner and the state commercial unit, then stepped away to speak to a number marked confidential. She returned with a firm face and told Dorian she needed one more favor while crews secured the scene. She asked him to drive to the scrapyard 2 exits west, where way logs sometimes kept more truth than anyone expected. At the yard, a supervisor named Harlan Voss, age 55, carried a tablet loaded with camera stills and cash tickets. He said people brought cut frames to his scale weekly, and he flagged one ticket dated 3 days after the reported outage. The still showed a flatbed hauling a truck frame section without a cab, strapped tight with chains and cheap ratchet binders. The driver wore a reflective vest, a hat pulled low, and gloves that looked new, and his hands seemed unsteady at the counter. Harlan remembered the hands because the driver dropped a toll receipt while counting bills, then apologized like he was late for something else. The camera caught the corner of the paper, and the blue stripe matched the one on Dorian's find. Ortiz requested the original video and the ticket, then compared plate numbers with the state registry and commercial inspections. The plate belonged to a hauler who reported his flatbed stolen for one night, then found it returned with fresh chain marks. He never filed a full report because the trailer came back clean, and he feared insurance delays could wreck his month. Piece by piece, a picture formed that did not look like a ghost or a river taking what it wanted. A driver left a warehouse near midnight, stopped at the turnout, and met someone who needed the cab but not the frame. The someone posed as a camera contractor, killed a low-priority feed, then arranged to hide a cab where eyes rarely linger long. The twist came from a small sticker inside the cab roof, which a trooper peeled away from dust with a gentle thumb. It showed a fleet service company that kept neat records, including oil changes, mileage notes, and a knack for precise dates. Their files showed work performed 2 weeks before the disappearance, and the mechanic wrote a side note about a key copy. The mechanic wrote that a third key was requested by a man who said he was the night dispatcher, and he paid in cash. The mechanic thought nothing of it until Ortiz called. Then he remembered the man never signed the usual authorization line. The shop camera showed the man wearing a vest like a contractor, and the badge sleeve again appeared strangely empty. Ortiz pulled toll plaza footage from the night in question and synchronized it with the scrapyard stills and the bridge notes. The day cab crossed the plaza as expected, and the timestamp matched the receipt tucked in the culvert lip. The truck exited near the turnout, camera glare washed the lane, then resumed with a frame that missed a single clear license view. Witness statements placed a white day cab idling without a trailer, and a clerk recorded restless hands that left a paper corner. A technician refused an access request, and a maintenance line captured footsteps and a door open sound after the call ended. A stolen flatbed left and returned in a narrow window, and a cut frame crossed a scale with a driver who spoke softly. The medical examiner recovered remains from the cab, and dental records from a previous injury matched a profile kept by his dentist. The family received a closed answer shaped like sorrow rather than speculation, because speculation had gnawed at them for years. The drywall load had been simple, the route had been familiar, and the end had hidden in a slope beside a lonely turnout. Motive came faster than Dorian guessed, and it turned on a small insurance clause that rewarded a competing carrier. The person posing as a contractor had worked for that carrier briefly, then left a digital trail of stolen dispatch templates. He understood cameras, toll patterns, and how to bend the timing of people who worked graveyard shifts with tired eyes. Ortiz did not say solved aloud in front of anyone, and she used the gentle phrasing investigators save for families who have waited. She told them the discovery was due to a maintenance worker who kept notes, who walked slowly, and who refused to shrug. She mentioned the receipt that waited in a lip everyone missed, and she promised it would be handled with care. A week later, Dorian returned to the turnout with a new grate and a broom because he wanted the place to look tended. He replaced the odd bracket with the correct plate, tightened the bright bolt, and brushed the concrete until the dust lifted. Cars hissed past, and a train horn carried from somewhere distant, and the ditch water moved with a plain, steady sound. He thought about simple, measurable things as he loaded the cones and folded his checklist, and the tune finally came back. His father used to whistle that tune while changing oil in a gravel driveway under a high summer Sunday. He stood quietly, listened to wind in the pines, and let the ordinary noise of the road remind him why details matter. Karen's notebook went back under the counter, Orville's green ledger returned to a shelf, and the scrapyard ticket stayed scanned. The river cameras got a new maintenance sticker with a fresh signature line, and technicians added a habit of requesting 2 verifications. The county posted a small plaque at the turnout with no names, only a line about patience and careful work. When Dorian passed that spot after later storms, he slowed as a reflex, and he watched small things settle where gravity pointed. He understood that places remember without meaning to, and that a crumpled paper can hold a night in its faded stripe. He started stopping for coffee at the store more often, just to say hello and to count the steady ring of the doorbell. The road kept moving, trucks kept downshifting on the grade, and the turnout regained its ordinary shabbiness in summer heat. Dorian did not tell the whole story to anyone at the diner, and he did not dramatize what the cable hooks revealed. He kept the memory in the quiet pocket of workdays, where tools sat cleaned in their tray and notes lined up square. There was no miracle in any of it, only a patient chain of human attention passed hand to hand without ceremony. The receipt was not miraculous either, it was simply patient, wedged where water and wind forgot to sweep. A missing driver got his name back in a single sentence, and a family traded uncertainty for grief that could finally breathe. Years will pass, and that turnout will keep catching wrappers and leaves, and a worker will kneel to clear them. Someone will hum without knowing why, and maybe remember how a small slip of paper can outweigh a rumor. The place will not speak, yet it will still hold that long night in the print of its concrete, quiet as a held breath. Dorian drove away as shadows crossed the lane markers and the orange hood flashed twice in the side mirror. He felt lighter and heavier at the same time, which is how truth can sit after it finally finds a home. He did not chase the tune anymore, and he did not rush the checklist, because patient work had already taught him what mattered today. He believed there were other receipts under other lips somewhere, and he hoped other hands would take them gently. He kept his camera roll tidy, his gloves clean, and his pencil sharp enough to write down what needed remembering. The turnout stayed ordinary when he left, but the ordinary held a story now, and that felt exactly right. The Lost Logbook of Barrow Station. Residents of Utqiagvik in the North Slope Borough reportedly whispered about a missing logbook that surfaced one winter, a notebook tied to routine ice monitoring notes that hinted something unaccounted happened near sea ice ridges close to Point Barrow during 2019. The notebook belonged to Raymond Cole, age 59, a contracted field technician assigned to Barrow Station by a state research subcontractor living in town to document ice thickness changes and daily wildlife observations along the Chukchi Edge. Dispatch logs from the University Coordination Office showed routine check-ins until January 10th, then gaps appeared without supervisor explanation. Neighbors later said Cole kept predictable routines walking past Stevenson Street toward the shoreline each dusk, carrying measurement rods and a handheld radio for short-range alerts. Investigators noted Cole traveled alone most days, despite protocols requesting pairs in winter-field months due to wind chill hazards and unpredictable snow squalls. County File from 2009 referenced similar incidents of isolated technicians losing orientation after coastal gusts disrupted visibility, though no documented fatality occurred in that earlier case, and search teams responded quickly. State records confirmed Cole completed cold weather training in Anchorage, yet archived notes suggested he informally pushed hours to chase daylight windows several locals claimed were unsafe. The logbook pages described ice plates forming shallow ridges, movements subtle but present as temperatures dropped near -30. Cole wrote sentence after sentence, noting pressure cracks widening before midnight flare checks, and his wording grew more clinical, according to handwriting analysts. He marked polar bear prints near the western bluff on January 8th, then wrote that radio static increased during wind streaks. Records conflict whether that static resulted from atmospheric conditions or a low battery warning, since maintenance receipts showed his backup pack expired weeks earlier. On January 10th, Cole wrote that distant lights shimmered near the flow line and faded before his second measurement, a detail some locals claimed matched fishing vessel activity, although no Coast Guard summary listed traffic that evening. The next line in the notebook reported a low groan under the ice far from town, an acoustic echo documented in NOAA baseline data during shifting tides. Cole's tone remained detached and observant, avoiding emotional descriptions and instead referencing archived seismic tables for small cracks. His final complete sentence that day asked whether the hydrophone station southward still relayed signals, a question investigators never confirmed through equipment diagnostics. On January 11th, Cole failed to check in through routine Channel 2 frequency. A coworker named Deborah Mills, age 42 biologist, said she attempted radio contact at 9 and 10 in the morning without response. She then contacted station management, who reviewed dispatch logs and noted Cole last keyed his handset near the coastal berm. A county snow machine unit launched around noon, scanning drift patterns that reportedly shifted overnight due to westerly gusts. Searchers traced faint boot impressions leading north toward the icefoot, then losing them near an uneven ridge where brine seep froze into hard crystals. Radio pings from Cole's device failed to return, raising doubts about battery life or signal interference from pressure ridges. State records indicated no major storm that morning, yet archive notes from a weather observer mentioned sudden haze forming along the horizon. Some locals claimed they heard a single sharp ice crack around sunrise, though investigators never confirmed source timing. The notebook ended abruptly after January 10th entries, with the 12th page blank except for a graphite smudge that forensic technicians could not match to nearby strokes. County File from 2009 recorded similar smudge patterns in another coastal disappearance attributed to glove friction, although that earlier individual returned after 6 hours. Cole never returned, leaving equipment bag and anchor spikes behind near a flagged post. Responders cataloged every item, sealing them under evidence protocol and storing them in Anchorage. Cole's radio remained tuned to the standard research channel when recovered, volume medium-high, battery completely depleted according to hardware report. The receiving station log recorded static bursts during the morning gap, times matching tidal shift near second channel breakwater. Investigators considered whether frost buildup blocked antenna range, a known seasonal issue that technicians tried mitigating using heated covers. Some locals claimed they saw vehicle lights near the airport during search hours, though that detail held no link to Cole's route, according to State Review. Later interviews with Mills emphasized Cole's cautious habits, despite some suggestions he wandered beyond mapped safe points. She stated he often referenced archived notes to ensure reliable measurement routines, quoting older baseline tables from 2011 and earlier. Records conflict on whether he reported minor dizziness during cold snaps, as one email thread referenced fatigue, while another denied health concerns. Cole never filed leave requests, and his medical form indicated no chronic issues. A month after the disappearance, regional officers revisited the shoreline and documented ice shifts, noting fissures wider than field logs predicted. NOAA records showed barometric dips during late January, patterns capable of influencing ice pressure and sound transmission. The investigating team reviewed satellite radar scans to identify surface deformation, though resolution limits prevented certainty. Some locals claimed they saw a dark shape moving along the floe days later, a claim investigators never confirmed through wildlife camera pulls. Official conclusion listed probable hypothermia near unstable ice sections, a determination consistent with coastal research fatalities elsewhere in Arctic regions. No body surfaced despite thaw season, sweeps, and gear remnants remained stored under state authority. County records listed case inactive but unresolved, pending future evidence or remains discovery. Archived notes from internal review committees emphasized radio maintenance gaps and recommended dual patrol policies. The logbook itself raised questions among analysts, especially lines referencing low-frequency resonance and fading lights near the horizon. Marine acoustics specialists acknowledged that ice sheets often create harmonic tones during freeze expansion, phenomena documented in northern field journals. Yet handwriting review found slight tremor in final entries, raising hypotheses about cold exposure or glove stiffness. Some locals claimed Cole heard distant machinery, though investigators never confirmed any offshore activity. Through subsequent winters, technicians continued surveys near Barrow Station following updated safety protocols that required partner travel and beacon checks. Dispatch logs now documented hourly confirmations, reducing gaps present during Cole's final assignment period. State records noted no repeat disappearance in years since, though internal memos still cited Cole's case during seasonal briefings. Archived notes in training binders referenced his name beside cold weather guidelines, reinforcing adherence to check-in rules. In absence of confirmed remains or additional entries, the logbook stayed the primary record of his final hours. The writing remained steady until abrupt cessation, leaving investigators with ice pressure data and vague references to distant lights. Records conflict whether those lights came from distant research, craft, or atmospheric mirage, since winter inversions near Utqiagvik occasionally distort visibility. The notebook rested in a secure vault cited in state literature about Arctic risk management. Visitors to Utqiagvik sometimes asked old residents about Cole, and responses shifted between cautionary tone and plain factual retelling. Some locals claimed stray radio static persisted at the shoreline during certain winds, though communications reports never verified interference significance. The county file from 2009 noted public interest spikes during tourist seasons, yet official channels kept measured language. Cole's name remained printed in field rosters and advisory bulletins, his logbook a reminder of precise observation amid uncertain ice fields. Stories like this sit between datasheets and winter ground truth, where radio checks meet drifting snow and pressure ridges reset landscapes overnight. Cole's measured notes followed standard scientific phrasing, his attention fixed on ice patterns and environmental shifts. Reportedly, a small memorial marker sits near the research building, foyer listing his service dates and assignment record. The case stayed open in memory and procedure rather than active search, grounded in documented logs and unanswered observations. The stories. Never follow hazard markers from that highway turnout. The warning was simple and unglamorous, according to incident notes kept by the county office. The markers near the turnout reportedly changed positions overnight. Calder Ruiz was 42, and he worked as a traffic sign technician who logged odd reports. He drove a white service pickup, carried a clipboard, and kept a cheap digital recorder for quick notes. He had a plain goal that morning, which was to verify a complaint about missing reflectors. He planned to check mile marker signs, take a few photos, and head back before lunch to file a routine update. The highway ran through scrub hills and freight yards, with a turnout used by truckers and roadside vendors. The spot felt unremarkable, except for a slanted ditch and a concrete culvert with a narrow access grate. A vendor named Orla Finn had filed the first report 2 weeks prior, according to archived calls. She sold tamales from a van, and she told the dispatcher that reflective markers appeared one morning where none had been. She said the markers led not along the shoulder, but down toward the culvert. She also added that her friend nearly drove into the ditch after following the line at dawn. Calder treated such claims with patience, and he had learned that small rumors often hid simple maintenance errors. He expected some prank with stolen cones or a set of survey flags placed by a contractor in a hurry. The turnout was quiet when he parked, and the wind pushed grit against his boots in little waves. He saw the usual chevron sign, the battered guardrail, and 2 cracked plastic markers leaning near a pothole. He walked the shoulder and took photos, counting faded hash marks and a torn strip of reflective tape. He spoke 3 short notes into his recorder. Then he crouched to examine a set of fresh adhesive pads near the grate. He found a footprint pressed into the powdery dirt between the road and the ditch. The heel had a square pattern, and the toe area looked scuffed sideways as if someone shifted quickly while lifting weight. He looked back toward the vendor spot and saw Orla's van roll in behind him with a sputter. She waved from the window, and he waved back. Then she parked and stepped out with a thermos and a paper cup. "You picked a windy day?" she said with a quick smile. "Something new happened last night. It moved again." Calder kept his tone casual, because people shared more when no one made a big show of expertise. He asked what she meant, and she pointed to a row of small reflective buttons arranged along the gravel like breadcrumbs. He followed the dot pattern with his eyes and saw how it led down the gentle slope. The dots curved right, skirted the drain opening, and ended near the culvert mouth where the grate sat partly ajar. He took more photos and a measurement. Then he pulled a glove and tested the grate with a light tug. It shifted with the gritty squeal of old metal, and a faint smell of machine oil rose from the dark. Orla poured coffee and set it on his tailgate. Then she said she had a witness. A night guard from the freight yard told her he had seen a pickup here after midnight, and the guard thought it belonged to utilities. Calder asked if the guard gave a plate or description, and she nodded slowly while searching her phone. She had texted herself a note, which named a green pickup with a white magnetic sticker on the door. He logged that detail and thanked her. Then he walked the turnout again to find any scrap of packaging. Behind a clump of saltbush, he found a cardboard sleeve from reflective pavement dots with a partial supplier address. He called the number listed on the sleeve, and a receptionist confirmed the dots shipped last month to a paving subcontractor. The name matched a company that often handled minor patching, which made the dots less mysterious. He left a message for the subcontractor, then he returned to the grate and peered into the culvert. Air moved with a faint metallic whine, not from wind alone, and he heard a rhythmic clack like a tired fan. Near the grate hinge, he spotted a new bolt that did not match the others. It had a bright finish, and it sat barely finger-tight, which suggested someone opened the grate often since the last inspection. He checked his records on the tablet and found the culvert marked clean in early summer. He had signed that report himself, and there had been no mention of special hardware, which sharpened his attention now. A highway trooper pulled in as the wind picked up, and the patrol unit idled beside the vendor van. The trooper introduced himself as Officer Laird, and he said dispatch had pinged him after Orla's call. Calder appreciated troopers at scenes like this because traffic safety turned on small collaborations. He walked the trooper through the dots, the loose bolt, and the unknown pickup. Then he asked for a quick shoulder closure. With the shoulder blocked by the cruiser, he lifted the grate with a strap and set it aside slowly. The culvert was a rectangular tunnel of poured concrete, and the floor held shallow water moving with a steady push. The fan noise grew louder, and he traced it to a box set against the interior wall beyond the opening. It looked like a toolbox at first glance, but a closer look showed a compact pump with a battery and a timer. He crouched and read the timer label. Then he photographed the device and the wiring with the flash. The timer was set to activate before dawn, synchronized with the hour when visibility was worst for sleepy drivers. He followed the hose from the pump and found it terminated at a spray nozzle near the road edge. The nozzle aimed up toward the gravel where the dots were placed, and the residue felt slick on his fingertip. He checked the jug attached to the pump and read a chemical name he recognized from training. The substance was a water repellent that reduced surface friction, used properly on tools but dangerous on pavement. He took a steady breath and reviewed the scene in his head. Then he explained his working theory to the trooper. The device primed the slope, the dots guided a vehicle, and the grate could be forced to swallow a wheel. They followed the nozzle line up to a small clamp on the guardrail where a cable tie held it steady. The tie was new and left trimmed too cleanly, which suggested a practiced hand rather than a careless prankster. Officer Laird called the county investigator, and the call log later showed the time in clean figures. While they waited, a long-haul driver pulled over and asked if the turnout was open, then decided to keep moving. Calder returned to the footprint and photographed a few more impressions, each with the same square heel. He then found something half buried near the chevron post, which turned out to be a white magnetic door sign. The sign had faded letters that once spelled a bland utility name, but the adhesive edge smelled fresh. He wrapped it in a trash bag and placed it gently in a plastic bin from his truck. The county investigator arrived with a camera and a calm voice, and she listened without interrupting as Calder summarized. She then asked Orla about the near crash, and Orla mentioned a delivery van that swerved at dawn. Orla said the driver never reported officially, but he left a voicemail on her phone with a quick apology. He had followed the reflectors into the slope, then jerked the wheel when the front tire slipped on the wet gravel. The investigator asked to hear the message, and she recorded the playback with her own device. She then called the freight yard and reached the night guard, who confirmed a green pickup arriving late and leaving quickly. Calder's message to the subcontractor finally got a return call, and the project manager sounded confused but cooperative. He said no crew had worked near the turnout that month, and he warned that their old magnetic signs were missing. The manager emailed a list of inventory that included reflective dots and a compact pump stolen from their yard. He also mentioned a former employee who had left angry messages after being let go for safety violations. The investigator requested the former employee's name for her notes, and the manager provided it along with a last known number. He then forwarded a statement from a foreman who claimed the ex-worker knew that turnout well. Calder reviewed his photos and realized the dot's position near the culvert matched a layout used in temporary lane closures. The spacing looked intentional, and the curve guided a driver toward the grate with deceptive precision. The investigator noticed another detail while kneeling near the new bolt that Calder had flagged earlier. She pointed out metallic dust on the ground and a tiny notch on the bolt head, which suggested frequent wrenching. They widened the search radius and found a stash buried under a stack of broken asphalt chunks. The stash included more reflectors, a small roll of white tape, and a bag of hose fittings in a sealed pouch. Officer Laird radioed for a property tech, and the investigator began a chain of custody log with brisk handwriting. She photographed each item where it lay, then bagged them and labeled the bags with location notes. Calder stepped back and considered the pump timer again, and he did a quick test under the investigator's supervision. He set the timer to 1 minute, and they watched a fine spray coat the gravel near the culvert mouth. The evidence lined up into an unlovely picture, which pointed toward deliberate confusion rather than roadside mischief. The dots provided a path, the spray reduced friction, and the grate hinge allowed a channel to swallow a tire. The investigator checked records for recent calls in the area, and she found 3 reported near misses over 2 weeks. Each call described a vehicle that skidded near the turnout after dawn, then regained traction and drove on. A parts receipt tucked beneath the stash added another strand. When the property tech unfolded it slowly, it listed a specialty bolt from a hardware store, and the timestamp lined up with one of the near-miss mornings. They visited the small hardware store after finishing the scene, and the clerk remembered the buyer by a tattoo. The description matched the former employee, and the clerk said the man paid cash and spoke little. Back at the office, Calder compiled his notes into a clean sequence with times, names, and small physical facts. He attached his photos, transcribed his brief recordings, and wrote a neutral summary that linked each item carefully. The county forwarded the package to a regional unit that handled roadway tampering cases with quiet focus. An investigator from that unit later contacted the former employee and documented a series of shifting explanations. According to a summary circulated at the end of the month, the former employee eventually admitted visiting the turnout. He claimed he had tried to stage a demonstration after a contractor dispute and insisted no actual harm was planned. He reportedly said the pump could not spray enough to cause a skidding hazard, which the unit's test disproved. He also denied placing the dots in a guiding pattern, a claim that failed against the measured spacing in photos. The regional unit issued a safety bulletin that recommended a simple phrase for public messaging about turnouts. The phrase advised drivers not to follow hazard markers from unusual positions near unlit exits or drains. Calder returned to the site after the bulletin, and the grate had been replaced with a fixed hinge and locking bar. The guardrail had fresh bolts, and the vendor spot held 2 official signs warning drivers to stay on the paved shoulder. Orla waved him over and handed him a tamale wrapped in foil while the wind finally calmed. She thanked him without ceremony, and he nodded and said the county would keep checking until the simple things stayed simple. He took one last set of photos for the file and listened to the highway hum roll across the ditch. The turnout had the same bones as before, yet it felt steadier now that the false path had been cleared. He thought about how easily people trusted bright markers on dark mornings when coffee had not quite landed. He knew most hazards were loud and obvious, while the quiet ones sometimes wore official colors and waited patiently. On his drive back, he passed a truck that drifted within its lane before settling, then held straight. He pictured the old dots pulling a half-awake driver toward the grate, and he felt a small knot loosen as he drove on. He filed his final report that afternoon with a measured tone that kept opinions out and observations in. He wrote that a set of reflective markers had been used in a misleading arrangement, and the arrangement was removed. He included a note that the pump residue had tested as a commercial water repellent, not a generalized automotive fluid. He added that the timer settings matched the period between first light and morning shift changes at the yard. The county closed the work order 1 week later, and the regional unit kept its file open for a while. The bulletin stayed pinned in the break room, and the phrase looked unremarkable unless you knew the ditch by that turnout. That plain warning lingered in Calder's thoughts during other jobs, and it shifted from words into a quiet habit. He looked twice whenever he saw improvised markers, and he checked drains with a hand on the grate and patient care. He sometimes drove by the vendor spot after long days, and Orla handed him coffee when he stopped. They both watched trucks push through the wind, and they listened for the honest sounds of tires on dry gravel and clean concrete. The story never made headlines because nothing sensational happened after the pump and the dots came up. The value sat in the absence of trouble, which rarely draws a crowd, but often saves one without applause. He knew the record would sit as a small case inside a larger folder, tucked behind more dramatic files. He also knew that simple markers could pull people off course when placed just slightly wrong, which was worth remembering. The highway kept moving as seasons turned, and the turnout kept its ordinary shape with stubborn consistency. The grate did its job, the guardrail held, and the only markers were the ones meant to guide travelers safely home. He set his clipboard on the passenger seat and rested his hands on the wheel before starting the engine. He preferred the humdrum truth that a fixed bolt and a clear shoulder could turn danger back into routine ground. He drove away without ceremony, and the afternoon sunlight threw short shadows across the service road. The sign on the vendor van flickered in the breeze, and the turnout stayed quiet as the wind lost interest for now. The county would return for inspections according to schedule, and a simple rule would ride with the crews. They would never follow hazard markers from that highway turnout, and they would check who had placed them and why. The abandoned cabin at Lake Minchumina. A quiet airstrip, a frozen lake, and an unclaimed cabin drew 3 people into a chain of disputed facts. Dana Holt was 41, a wildlife biologist from Fairbanks, sent to map willow stands around Lake Minchumina for browse surveys. She carried a handheld GPS unit, a laminated grid map, and a notebook stamped with state records inventory marks. Her assignment reportedly tied to a late winter moose project funded by a regional habitat grant from Anchorage. Dispatch logs later noted her gear list, including a borrowed sat phone with a weak interior signal. The plan put her 2 nights lakeside with a 3rd day for interviews in the village. Trevor Pike was 58, a bush pilot out of Nenana, flying a well-kept Cessna on skis toward the long white lake. He hauled fuel barrels, food boxes, and the biologist's duffel inside a strapped canvas pod for weight balance. Archived notes from his mechanic mentioned fresh spark plugs, a carb heat check, and a recent cylinder compression test. He told friends he liked the run across low spruce because the flatlight taught careful judgment. Some locals claimed he kept a copy of county file from 2009 in the hangar, though investigators never confirmed that. Mara Kovic was 33, a seasonal ranger based near Denali Park headquarters, riding snow machine for a cabin stewardship check. She logged cabin conditions, counted split firewood, and photographed stoves for safety compliance with a borrowed office camera. Her unit followed a written route that skirted the lake edge and crossed a marked portage used by winter travelers. The cabin at the lake's western reach appeared on her sheet as unused, though records conflict on the maintenance code. She planned to verify the lock, then continue north toward an old trapline shed. The cabin itself sat low in thin spruce, its roof scabbed with scrap metal and patched plywood from earlier seasons. A dock beam lay buried in snow with iron spikes that showed orange despite fresh powder and wind crust. Windows were covered with sheet tin, while one pane held a sagging plastic film stapled into frozen trim. A stovepipe rose, bent and scarred, suggesting a fall or awkward repair that never fully seated. Nearest tracks curved from the lake glare to the trees, then vanished into a wind-stripped swale. Pike landed before noon, set his skis near the hard line of the windrow, and watched crystals skate across the surface. He idled past a pair of snow berms and shut down with the prop horizontal, then stepped onto the snow with a practiced swing. The air sat dry and flat, and the tree line worked like a low fence against the distant hills. He saw the cabin shape through willow and alder stems, and he waved toward a dark doorway he assumed stood open. According to dispatch logs, his final radio call reported safe arrival and stable conditions. Holt skied from the drop point toward willow clusters flagged on her grid, pausing to measure stem height and browse scars. She wrote times that matched the sun's slow wheel across pale cloud, and she made notes on minor moose trails crossing drifts. Snow settled around her knees where the crust failed, and a dry squeak sounded where sleet grains spilled under her poles. Her GPS line wavered along the bank, then cut inland to avoid pressure ridges near the lake's midsection. State records later matched her coordinates to a low bench of black spruce and open willow. Kovic reached the lake's western edge near afternoon, where the wind pressed a clean glaze across the old trail. She idled her machine and lifted goggles, then checked the map case that held laminated sheets with numbered cabin codes. Her photographs showed a dark rectangle among cramped trunks, the near wall patched with mismatched planks and weathered screws. She logged time, temperature estimation, and the presence of one snow-packed step leading to the door seam. Investigators never confirmed whether her GPS waypoint uploaded immediately due to weak signal near the trees. The door stood closed, but a thin line of snow had drifted against the threshold, which suggested no recent exit. Kovic brushed the seam and pressed the handle, then paused when the wood shifted and a smell of old ash slipped out. Inside, light fell through a tear in the plastic, showing a rough table and a stove flecked with rust. A nailkin sat on the floor, half full of screws, and a spool of braided line rested beside a chipped mug. She wrote that nothing looked stolen, though records conflict about the status of a missing tool roll. Pike dragged fuel drums from the sled and stowed them near an alder line, and he marked each top with grease pencil. He strapped one box with canned beans and pilot bread onto a child's toboggan he kept for makeshift hauling. His boot tracks crossed an older trail that drift had softened, and the prints filled slowly as gusts pushed through the scrub. He followed the trail to the cabin edge, then lifted a glove against the window gap to block the glare. According to archived notes, he later mentioned a shape like jackets piled low along the far wall. Holt circled back toward the lake for new bearings, then saw a narrow flag of smoke pull sideways above the tree line. She clipped her notebook shut and worked back along her inbound track, and the smoke thinned as she crossed a hollow. A faint hammer sound carried through the cold, 1 and 2. Then a pause, then one again in careful pace. She told a recorder later that wind tricked distance and the sound came from ahead at the willow fringe. Dispatch logs list a call from her sat phone that broke before a location could transmit. Kovic noted the stove held cooled ash shaped like close-grained fans, which sometimes form after slow overnight burns. She saw 2 bed frames without mattresses and a plastic tub of nails beside a broken lantern with a missing globe. A shoestring tied around a shelf post held a cluster of labels with faded writing and a smeared date in blue. She wrote it as midwinter, though investigators never confirmed the writing due to moisture damage that lifted the ink. Her photos show a floor scuff that turns at the threshold and stops under the hinge shadow. Pike knocked and stepped to the doorway, then waited while his eyes adjusted to the low light and muted colors. The ranger nodded and pointed at the scuffed floor, and he answered with an open palm toward the stove and table. He set the food box on the bench and tugged a corner of the plastic on the window to let air pass. The plastic snapped at one brittle crease, and a thin clatter rolled across the boards until it settled near the foot. Archive notes remark that the sound resembled pellets falling through a funnel, which matched small screws. Holt arrived as clouds thickened, set her poles by the door, and counted 3 sets of prints arranged in a loose chevron. She wrote that one trail ran from the lake to the door, and another crossed from south to west without clear origin. The third ran out toward the mid-lake glare, and its heel marks looked deep where crust had softened. She photographed a partial tread rib that looked commercial rather than custom, and the pattern resembled a hardware chain winter boot. State records later attached her images to a case file with conflicting captions and differing scale bars. The stove mouth held a curl of birch, which burned at the end like a lifted spoon and then fell. A few flakes of ash moved up the pipe seam, and a faint warmth hung 2 feet above the floorboards. Kovic said the cabin smelled like old smoke, not fresh, and she thought someone burned earlier and left. Pike disagreed and pointed to a brown ring on the stove lid where a pot's wet outline dried in an uneven halo. Investigators never confirmed any pot, and the photographs lack a matching circle on the table boards. They found a ledger book under the bench, wrapped in waxed paper that crinkled and tore when lifted free of splinters. The cover showed a stamped supply brand for flour, and inside a rough list of dates traced a column along the margin. County File from 2009 reportedly mentioned a similar cabin ledger used for shared caches among winter travelers. The dates here stepped through early winter into late January, then stopped abruptly without a name or a final note. Records conflict on whether a missing page existed, because the thread holes do not appear consistent. Outside, the lake made a hollow drumming as wind shoved crust into ridges that ticked against the skis and sled. Holt tested the crust and stepped toward the mid-lake track, which bent left and right like a cautious crossing. A shallow oval showed where someone placed a heavy bag and lifted it again, leaving granules pressed into the glaze. She measured the oval's length with her ski pole and wrote the number inside her notebook above a time mark. Dispatch logs later repeat that number with an error, which investigators never resolved after interviews ended. Pike followed the south trail along the tree line where low branches swept the snow and hid thin lines of travel. He saw a thumb-sized shard of clear plastic with a rolled edge, which looked like a lantern piece with frost glaze. He placed it on a stump and marked a small circle around it with the ski tip, then turned toward the cabin again. The light dropped and the sky fell into flat shadow, which pushed contrast down until the trees felt closer. Archive notes suggest the shard later disappeared, and no inventory photo shows its presence. Kovic radioed a quick status to a regional repeater reporting cabin access, no apparent vandalism, and uncertain recent activity. Wind noise clipped her words, and the signal dragged, then returned in a burst that carried only the timestamp. She closed the stove lid and reset the ledger on the bench, then photographed the plastic tear near the window frame. The cold sharpened, and her machine coughed when she thumbed the primer, which she wrote as normal for that temperature. Investigators never confirmed the exact temperature, as the village reading differed from the lake's surface reading that evening. They agreed to leave the cabin secured and mark the location as potentially occupied within the last day, pending new snow. Holt wanted one more sweep near the mid-lake oval, and Pike offered to walk the edge while Kovic logged coordinates. Footfalls made short squeaks and a low creak where drift hid shallow overflow, and each step left a clean trench. They stopped at a second oval imprint that bore the same pole-measured length as the first near the glare. State records later argued the ovals could be gear rests from an auger or a short fuel can. Dark came quickly, and the trees lost edges, so they moved toward the airstrip where the plane sat, angled into the wind. Pike primed and pulled the prop through slowly, then climbed in and checked a panel glow that looked steady. The engine caught with a short puff and settled into an even sound that smoothed with carb heat after a careful count. Holt strapped into the right seat, and Kovic rode her machine along the edge until the light fell to gray. Archive notes describe no further radio calls from the lake until morning. Overnight, light snow reached the village and the lake, and morning tracks softened into shallow rolls by midday. A second ranger team reached the cabin from the north and found the door secured and the stove cold. They reported no ledger on the bench, and the nails sat in the can without the top layer that Kovic described. Some locals claimed wind pushed small things under gaps, and mice could drag paper toward cracks near the sill. Investigators never confirmed any mouse sign, and the photographs show only smooth dust along the baseboard. Holt filed her browse data in Fairbanks within the week, and the coordinates aligned with earlier moose counts from a prior winter. She included a short addendum about the ovals and the partial tread pattern that matched a commercial winter boot. State records acknowledged her note and attached it to a maintenance ticket for the cabin with a follow-up box. The ticket moved between offices, and records conflict about whether a later inspection occurred before thaw along the lake. A final entry closed the ticket in early spring with a single line about no hazard identified. Pike flew 2 more runs to the interior that month, and his logbook shows fuel consumption within normal range for the airframes. He wrote short comments about surface conditions near Minchumina, including 2 mentions of glare patches that made depth judgment difficult. Archived notes add that he left a spare belt and plug set with a friend at the Nenana hangar. Some locals claimed he removed the county file from 2009 from the shelf, though investigators never confirmed the timing. His last statement about the cabin said only that empty places keep their own time, which is not an opinion recorded as fact. Kovic finished her cabin route and submitted photographs, and her supervisor added captions and a brief summary for the binder. The caption under the plastic tear mentioned a likely weather-related failure of the film from prior patchwork. Dispatch logs show a short call from her to a friend near McGrath about icy trails and a slow return after a storm. She kept the route map with the laminated codes, and a later scan shows a faint pencil check beside the cabin square. Investigators never confirmed who made the check, and the binder copy prints the line with a light streak. Weeks later, village travelers reported 2 small stakes visible near the mid-lake line after a warm spell cut the crust. The stakes sat where the ovals had rested, and each held braided line tied in a simple hitch around the shaft. A small flag of cloth clung to one stake and tore free when pulled, leaving a short fringe of thread. Some locals claimed the cloth looked like shirt flannel, while others said it was a cut rag from a fuel wipe. Records conflict on color, and no sample appears in the final envelope attached to the case file. By summer, lake water pulled at the dock beam and lifted it slightly, showing spikes that caught sun beside floating moss. The cabin door swelled in the damp, and the plastic patch sagged where heat softened the staples along the frame. A new scratch marked the bench top, straight and pale, with fine dust settled at the far end near the ledger place. No ledger lay there, and the nails in the can showed a different arrangement than winter photographs from the binder. State records closed the seasonal report with a line that stated no further action pending future complaints. Autumn brought clear nights and sharp stars over the interior, and the lake edge hushed with thin ice before snowfall. The cabin sat in the same low posture among thin spruce, its stovepipe tilted and bent in familiar profile. Travelers passed on the portage and saw no light inside, and the door held fast against early wind. The ovals by the mid-lake line had filled and hardened, and the stakes fell flat under glare and frost. Dispatch logs for the region listed minor incidents only, and no entry referenced the cabin after the first snow. What remains are records that do not align, voices that differ on colors and smells, and photographs that miss small things. The cabin holds patched boards and a bent pipe, with a bench scar that means little without a missing book. Some locals claimed the place hosted caches that shifted among hands, but investigators never confirmed any schedule or written rules. There is a stove lid ring that might be a shadow, and footprints that waver between soft crust and uncertain depth. According to state records and archived notes, the cabin stands unclaimed at Lake Minchumina, and the file stays thin.